Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Hami and these are the headlines. Pakistan has called on the international community to take notice of Indian conspiracies in Gilgit-Baltistan. At a media briefing in Islamabad, the activist from Gilgit-Baltistan said India wants to create a division in the region. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on the international community to ensure Myanmar's military coup fails. In an interview, the UN chief termed the reversal of elections unacceptable. Meanwhile, Myanmar's military has ordered telecom companies to block Facebook services over opposition against the coup. The United States says no decision has been made on its troop levels in Afghanistan. The State Department statement comes after a bipartisan report to Congress urged the Biden administration to slow the troops' withdrawal. The report said Washington should not abandon the Afghan peace process but ignore the May 1 pull-out deadline. Washington says it is disappointed by the top UN court's ruling that it can take up Tehran's case to overturn US sanctions, criticizing Iran for casting the ruling as a victory. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the court has issued a preliminary ruling, not a decision on the merits. Earlier, the International Court of Justice ruled it has jurisdiction to hear the Iran sanctions case. Over 1,700 people have died from COVID-19 in Mexico overnight, with the death toll crossing 161,000. In Pakistan, over 1,500 people tested positive and 31 died overnight as the death toll climbs to 11,833. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.26 million lives, infecting over 104.3 million people so far. And in cricket, Pakistan have lost 3 wickets with 63 runs on the board in the first innings of the second test against South Africa in Rawalpindi. Left-arm orthodox spinner Keshav Maharaj has bagged 2 wickets while Anrich Norjay took one of the Proteas. The hosts lead the 2-match test series 1-0. Those were the headlines, and let's take you back to the National Press Club in Islamabad, where a press conference is being held to expose the Indian conspiracies against Pakistan.
तो कम से कम कदर करें इस मिल्लत का, इस गिलगित-बाल्टिस्तानियों का। खुदा, हम बिजली के हवाले से, रोड के हवाले से, तालीम और सेहत और रोजगार के हवाले से अगर हम एहतिजाज करते हैं, जलसा जुलूस निकालते हैं, तो इसका मतलब हम रियासत मुखालिफ वहाँ पे कुछ अदाई नहीं रखते हैं। हम नौजुवान पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ असलहा उठाकर बाकायदा जंग करने के अज़ाइम नहीं रखते हैं। न सिर्फ गिलगित-बाल्टिस्तान बल्कि हर वो जो मुसलमान और पाक व पाकीज़ा खानदान में पैदा हुआ हो, वो कभी भी अपने बरादर हम अकीदा व हम ईमान मुल्क के अंदर इंतशार फैलाना नहीं चाहेगा। इज़ा अदालत आलिया से मेरा गुजारिश है कि हमारे मेहदी शाह साहब के बयान की रोशनी में बाहर बैठकर, चाहे वो अंदरून में हो चाहे वो बैरून में हो, इस तरह के सादा नौजवानों को गुमराह करने वाले ताकतों को अदालत आलिया करार वाकई सजा देने में अपना किरदार अदा करें।
गिलगित-बाल्टिस्तान में
The live visuals coming from National Press Club in Islamabad, where the participants are exposing the Indian conspiracies against Pakistan, and they've urged the international community to take notice of India's malicious campaign against Pakistan. And they also said India's intentions have become clear after it revoked the Article 370 of Kashmir and snatching its special autonomy back in August 2019. And the people also said that they are being given different baits by the Indian intelligence agencies as it wants to disrupt peace in Gilgit-Baltistan region. Now we'll resume the bulletin. Pakistan has called on international community to take notice of Indian conspiracies in Gilgit-Baltistan. At a media briefing in Islamabad, the activist from Gilgit-Baltistan said India wants to create a division in the region. Advocate Abbas says a particular group backed by India is active in anti-Pakistan activities in Gilgit-Baltistan. He said India also wants to divide Gilgit-Baltistan. Abbas said people of Gilgit-Baltistan will never allow Indian conspiracies to succeed. Mehdi Shah, Rizvi's daughter Tayyiba Rizvi, said anti-Pakistan elements tried to influence her father. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on the international community to ensure Myanmar's military coup fails.
In an interview, the UN chief termed the reversal of elections unacceptable and called for the restoration of constitutional order. Guterres expressed hope that Myanmar's military will understand that this is not the way to move forward. The UN Security Council is also discussing a possible condemnation statement. The US says it is disturbed by reports that ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi was charged following the military's takeover. State Department spokesman Ned Price repeated a call for all detained in the coup to be immediately released. Earlier, police raided San Suu Kyi's party offices and filed charges against her. She has been remanded in custody until 15 February. The charges include breaching import and export laws and possession of unlawful communication devices. Meanwhile, the army has ordered telecom companies to block Facebook services over opposition against the coup. This comes as demonstrators gathered in Myanmar's second most populous city of Mandalay.
The United States says no decision has been made on its troop levels in Afghanistan. Earlier, a bipartisan State Department report to Congress urged the Biden administration to slow the withdrawal.
The report said Washington should not abandon the Afghan peace process, but abandon the May 1 exit deadline. A Congress-appointed panel recommended that the number of forces should be reduced only if security conditions improve. It added, withdrawing all U.S. troops could lead to civil war, destabilize the region, and revive the ISIS threat. Meanwhile, a top EU official said half the Afghans need humanitarian aid, but rising violence is preventing deliveries. European Commissioner for Crisis Management, Yanis Lenarčič, also called for an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire. Lenarčič visited Kabul to announce the EU will provide €32 million for humanitarian projects in 2021.
Washington says it is disappointed by the UN court ruling that it can take up Iran's case to overturn US sanctions. Earlier, the International Court of Justice ruled it has the jurisdiction to hear the Iran sanctions case. Criticizing Iran for calling the ruling as a victory, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the court has issued a preliminary ruling, not a decision on merit. Price said the ICJ did not accept Washington's well-founded legal arguments that the case is outside the court's jurisdiction. He added the US remains clear about the dangers posed by Iran's malign activities. Earlier, International Court of Justice President Abdul Qavi Ahmed Yusuf rejected US objections, but said a ruling could take months or even years. The U.S. has pulled an aircraft carrier out of the Gulf. In a statement, a Pentagon spokesperson said the current administration does not aim to keep the carrier's presence in the region. John Kirby said the aircraft carrier has sailed from the Central Command in the Middle East to the Indo-Pacific Command region. Kirby said Secretary of Defense believes the U.S. has a robust presence in the Gulf to respond to any threat. He added Washington is constantly watching the threat and trying to meet it with proper capabilities. This comes after the U.S. reversed a decision last month to bring the aircraft carrier home from the Gulf. Syria says its defense systems have intercepted Israeli missiles in the southern region. The Israeli military has declined to comment. Syrian state media said the Israeli aggression targeted Quneitra governorate. It reported no casualties but only limited material damage. Israeli officials previously said their forces struck hundreds of Iranian targets in Syria. Over 1,700 people have died from COVID-19 in Mexico overnight, with the death toll crossing 161,000. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.26 million lives, infecting over 104.3 million people so far. More in this report. The planet's fight against the new coronavirus is finally gaining momentum as studies show growing public confidence in vaccines, and with over 108 million doses administered already, the number of vaccinated people has exceeded the global infections tally. The UN's vaccine initiative, COVAX, has issued the list of countries scheduled to get their share from the initial 337 million doses. However, while mass immunizations rev up, the virus continues to claim tens of thousands across the globe, with the US being hit the hardest. The number of fatalities in the US has crossed 450,000, with the average daily deaths of 3,000. US Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci says the war against the pandemic is just beginning.
We have to be concerned about the mutants. Viruses will not mutate well if you don't give them the opportunity to replicate in a very large way. Namely, if you have an open playing field for the virus, they will replicate and they will mutate.
Mutant variants first found in South Africa and Brazil have now been detected in Turkey as well. The UK has initiated the first ever trials to assess the immune responses if doses of Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines are combined in a two-shot schedule. If proved viable, the mixing could improve vaccine distribution. Meanwhile, though Britain witnesses a slowdown in the spread of the disease, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned the country cannot afford to let its guard down just as yet.
And though today there are some signs of hope, the numbers of COVID patients in hospital are beginning to fall for the first time since the onset of this new wave, the level of infection is still alarmingly high.
South Korean Prime Minister has ordered a revamp of social distancing guidelines. The country's 5-tier distancing system has faced a public backlash for imposing unfair restrictions and curfews on specific businesses. China has reported 30 new COVID-19 cases, slightly up from a day earlier, but still well below the peaks seen last month. U.S. President Joe Biden and Senate Democrats have agreed to move swiftly to get the $1,400 stimulus checks to most Americans. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki made these remarks during a news briefing. U.S. President Joe Biden proposed a $1.9 trillion coronavirus stimulus for a country ravaged by the pandemic, but the Republicans are proposing to slash the package by more than half. The U.S. president has rejected the Republicans' $618 billion relief proposal, calling it inadequate. This coincides with the Democrats trying to invoke a budget reconciliation mechanism to pass the package without Republican support. But White House spokesperson Jen Psaki says the Democrats will try to make the process as bipartisan as possible.
During the conversation, the president and Democratic leaders also agreed to continue working to find areas of bipartisan agreement in an effort to integrate ideas and make the process as bipartisan as possible.
Pakistan is set to receive more than 17 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine in February under the UN-led COVAX initiative. COVAX is co-led by the WHO, the Gavi Vaccine Alliance and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Islamabad has already launched its nationwide immunization campaign after being gifted 500,000 doses by China earlier this week. Meanwhile, the virus has claimed 31 more lives and infected over 1,500 people overnight. This has pushed Pakistan's death toll to 11,833. The country has reported more than 550,000 cases so far, out of which almost 506,000 people have recovered. The health ministry says there are nearly 34,000 active cases in the country. Pakistan has reaffirmed commitment to expand relations with Egypt. It comes as ambassador of Egypt, Tariq Abdarogh, called on Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan. During the meeting, the two officials discussed bilateral issues and matters of mutual interest. The Prime Minister expressed a willingness to cooperate with Egypt on diverse fields, including trade, education and culture. In Pakistan, security forces have killed 4 terrorists in an anti-terrorism operation in northern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province's North Waziristan district. In a statement, the military's media wing said the 2 soldiers were martyred and 4 wounded in the exchange of fire. It said the operation was conducted after forces observed the presence of terrorists in a compound in Mir Ali area. The Inter-Services Public Relations said the troops faced heavy fire from terrorists the moment they cordoned off the area. It said the terrorists were involved in attacks on security forces. South Korea has pledged to boost ties with the United States. The country's presidential office says President Moon Jae-in spoke to his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden in a phone call. Moon's office said 2 leaders reaffirmed their commitment to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. It said the U.S. president praised the efforts of South Korea to resolve the inter-Korean conflict. Moon welcomed what he called America's return amid mounting global challenges. Meanwhile, the White House said Biden stressed his commitment to strengthening bilateral alliance and agreed to coordinate closely on North Korea. Canada has named the far-right Proud Boys on its terror list, saying they posed an active security threat. The move comes after last month's attack on the U.S. Capitol that left 5 people dead. At a news conference, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair said the domestic intelligence was increasingly worried about the group. Blair said the concerning escalation of violence, backed by activity and planning, triggered the response. He added, Canada will not tolerate ideological, religious or politically motivated acts of violence.
That there has been a serious and concerning escalation of violent, not just rhetoric, but activity and planning, and that's why we have responded as we have today. This update hopefully sends a strong message that Canada will not tolerate ideological, religious, or politically motivated acts of violence.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Justice Department has charged a top member of the group's Seattle chapter over alleged role in the Capitol riots. Now, moving on, the European Union has rejected Britain's demand to extend a Brexit grace period for checks on goods going from the UK to Northern Ireland. The bloc said the post-Brexit trade treaty gave London enough tools to solve the problems. British Minister Michael Gove and European Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic discussed the issue over a video call. In an interview after the call, Sefcovic said that under the post-Brexit trade deal, it was for Britain to resolve the problems. However, Sefcovic agreed to work intensively with the UK to resolve difficulties impeding the deliveries of goods. Meanwhile, in a statement, Gove said he and Sefcovic would meet in London next week. In Tunisia, 4 soldiers have been killed in an IED explosion in mountain region near the Algerian border. The Defense Ministry says soldiers were tasked with carrying out a combing operation of Mount Margilia. In a statement, the ministry said the sweep was part of the regular anti-terrorist operations. The area is home to a militant group that the Tunisian army has been fighting for years. Tunisia has seen a surge in terrorism since President Zainul Abidine Ben Ali was ousted in the country's 2011 revolution. Dozens of members of the security forces have been killed since then in attacks by the militants. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Human Rights Watch has called for an independent and international inquiry into a blast at Beirut's port last year that claimed over 200 lives. In a statement, the group said Lebanese authorities have failed in the past 6 months to deliver any justice. It said the domestic investigation is riddled with serious due process violations and political leaders' attempts to stop it. Authorities have detained several senior officials, including the port's general manager, over the blast. In December, a judge charged Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Hassan Diab and 3 former ministers with negligence. But the investigation has been paused after 2 former ministers charged in the case filed a motion to replace the judge. Stocks in Asia Pacific have declined as the positive sentiment from a two-day global markets rally fades. The Kospi in South Korea is leading the losses, sliding close to 1.5%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index and the Nikkei 225 in Japan have also slipped over 1%. The ASX 200 in Australia has dipped close to 1%. However, mainland Chinese shares have shed the least, edging down just over 0.5%. Now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.